Welcome to the podcast. It's the best podcast in the world. This is going to end up on the show. I know it, motherfucker.
Descend, feel it falling away. I never wanted to end up here like this. Now there is nothing to say. It won't be long before I choke out.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 127 of Epitome of Stupidity, your favorite damn metal show. Today we've got Dry Kill fucking Logic on the show, and they're one of my favorite damn bands. Their new release, Now You Belong with the Dead, was playing there for the intro, but more on them and my love for them shortly. If you're new here, welcome in. I'm Clint. I'll be your host. If you hit that there subscribe button for me to wherever it is that you're hearing this from, we'll be best buds for life. I'm going to talk for about 3-ish minutes, and then we're on to the good stuff with today's guest, who just happens to be one Cliff Regano of the aforementioned Dry Kill Logic. Until then, how about a mead read? Look, if this is the best and your favorite metal show, then I have to make sure to provide you with the best mead. It's my duty. I said duty. Anyways, go to brimminghornmeadery.com. That's brimminghornmeadery.com to get you some award-winning mead. And at checkout, use code EPITOMEAD. That's EPITOMEAD for a 10% discount. And when it arrives, you'll still be able to enjoy 100% of the deliciousness. Okay, just a couple quick Clint notes before we jump in with Cliff, the frontman, again, of Dry Kill Logic. The band has been around in one form or another, technically since the mid-90s, but the first actual Dry Kill album was The Darker Side of Nonsense in 2001. I don't think it's out of line to say that at the start, they were not only in the nu metal scene, but one of the best doing it. With each release, they grew exponentially, though, whether it was 2004's The Dead and Dreaming, which they're doing some celebrating of here soon, or 2006's Of Vengeance and Violence, cementing themselves as not a band that could be easily categorized. They've released a few singles since 2019, the most recent being the previously mentioned Now You Belong with the Dead, and just recently made their triumphant fucking return to the stage at Welcome to Rockville. Let's talk more with Cliff about the return and all things Dry Kill Logic. Yeah? Random phone sounds, go. Beep, 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 boop. Ring. And he answered. On the line with me today is Cliff of fucking Dry Kill Logic. Cliff, how the hell are you today?
Good, man. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I am fucking splendid now that we're on the call, and I'm glad to have you.
Awesome.
Where are you calling from?
I am calling from the East Coast, Stamford, Connecticut, as a matter of fact.
Stamford, Connecticut. It makes things easier on me when somebody else is in the same damn time zone. So I think we're going to lead right off with something important here. I think this is both important and relevant, if for no other reason than to me. You're Cliff, vocals of Dry Kill Logic. I'm Clint, this podcast. What is the most common name that people call you when they somehow don't understand Cliff? And is it Clint? Because God knows I get called fucking Cliff a lot.
I do get called Clint, but I usually get called Chris when they get it wrong.
Okay, from Cliff to Chris. All right. There's some kind of trajectory there. So before we get started in full with future things and all the fun stuff here, if you would please give us a brief Cliff Notes, pun always intended, history of the band from inception till Now You Belong with the Dead.
You know, we sold our souls to rock and roll many moons ago. You know, we started this band. I guess I started this band hardcore since 94 is how I like to put it. You know, it began in the basements and, you know, the garages of, you know, my parents' house and our friends' houses as we were, you know, just learning how to play instruments and form songs and think as writers. And, you know, at a time when being in the band was really kind of the way to, and I'm air quoting, make it, you know, in this world. So we spent 6 or 7 years as an unsigned band, you know, releasing a few CDs on our own, just some EPs, touring up and down the East Coast, anywhere we could play for any money they would pay us. And then in 2000, we signed a production deal with Scrap 60, which is Eddie Wall and Rob Caggiano. And they had just come off of the Primer 55 record and had done a couple of other big albums. And we were their first production deal. So we started working on songs with them that would eventually become The Darker Side of Nonsense. and we signed with Roadrunner in 2001 and released that record. Toured the world and had a lot of fun. I mean, we were just babies, just kids at that point, and got to see and do a lot of stuff that we just never really thought we would. Um, like any dream scenario, at some point it ends, and you question whether it ever really happened at all. And we found ourselves in between record deals, which is when we had some lineup changes. Met Jason Bozzi, our current guitar player, and began writing what would eventually become The Dead and Dreaming. We released it independently in 2004, which was before most bands were doing that type of work. So that was a real interesting learning curve and exercise in how to be self-sufficient. And then we, released our third album, Vengeance and Violence, a little bit after we released our first DVD, The Magellan Complex. Both were new, endeavors for us. We were still working with Eddie and Rob, but we were moving through a couple of different studios with some really great engineers. And then, the music business was just evolving and shifting, and the band, like in any great game of musical chairs, finds itself without a seat at some point. And, we went on a hiatus, not for any particular personality disorders or any sort of reasons that we couldn't get along. We were all still very close to this day, and we were close in those moments too. And then eventually we just gravitated back towards the studio and the idea of writing songs together. In 2016, we started writing again, which was the first time in 10 years, and that produced the last 3 singles that we've released. So Vices, Don't See Ghosts, and the framework for what would become Now You Belong with the Dead. COVID happened in 2020, and that kind of put everybody back on their heels a little bit. And then, late last year, we received an offer through our agent to potentially perform on the Danny Wimmer festivals that we're on this year to celebrate 20 years of The Dead and Dreaming, which, we couldn't believe it had been 20 years, and then we couldn't believe that we were given an opportunity to celebrate it. So we decided it was a good time to finish up Now You Belong with the Dead. And here we are in 2025 having a conversation about the last 31 years. So what a long, strange trip it's been, to quote Jerry Garcia.
You mentioned Jason there, who's also had the fortune or misfortune of being on this fucking show before. Who else rounds out the band there?
So we still have Brendan Kane, who's been our bass player since 2005. He was in 100 Demons and 1,000 Falling Skies from Connecticut. A real sort of legend in the scene, and he's been with us for just about 20 years now. And we have Kevin Buto playing drums. Kevin is from the Acacia Strain, and he is just a killer. So we're super stoked to have him. And, this is really what I would call the toughest version of this band that's probably ever been. So it's very exciting to be on stage with such a group of talented guys.
Fuck yeah. And tell you what, let's jump with that to the Welcome to Rockville thing there. Your first show in 20 fucking years, celebrating the Dead and Dreaming, all those fun things that you mentioned. I mean, simply put, there's no smart question here. How fucking awesome was it, both in the moment and in general, to be back, some form of back?
Yeah, I mean, the overwhelming emotion, I think, is just gratitude to take up anyone's time. There's a lot of stuff you could consume in this life, and the fact that people are still consuming dry kill and that there's a demand for it in a live space, it's just humbling. After that is probably anxiety, but the best kind of nervous energy, the kind that like makes you realize there's something really important in front of you that you must take seriously. And I think it's been a long time since those synapses have fired in my mind to, have something that feels really new and really exciting in front of me. So I would say that, it's gratitude matched by nervous energy, but the whole process is probably about 7 months from the time we knew we were going to perform till the time we actually went on stage. And, it's you kind of check in mentally a few points along the way because you're so busy, but all of it has just been a wonderful experience. And then to be on site with all of these amazing bands, again, we're just so grateful to even be in this conversation. To be in these moments is something that I think, we find very special. So
How do you decide the set list in a situation like this, balancing the time constraints versus all the material, plus wanting to play new material, plus celebrating this and that? I bet that was a mind fuck.
Yeah, it's hard to whittle it down. I mean, we don't have a ton of records, but we have enough that it's hard to whittle into 30 minutes.
You also don't have any filler. Every song is awesome.
I appreciate that. And I think for us, we really just looked at it as, let's put the audience at the, end of that equation. At the end of the day, we've been away for 20 years, but they've lived with this music. So what songs do we believe they're going to want to hear based on consumption, based on sentiment, based on, feedback? How do we kind of craft something where every time we start the next song, they'll be like, that's the song we wanted to hear. And it's not, an easy exercise, and we're sure to leave some out. But I think the majority of them are pretty clear in a 7-minute set. We're pretty sure there's 4 of them that we know folks are going to want to hear. And then the fun is in that kind of middle grouping of how you want to, how you want to spend the time. Do you want to celebrate 20 years of the Dead and Dreaming? Do you want this to be a bit of a retrospect? Do you want to focus on some of the new tracks? And each show has a different approach to that. But, it's not the easiest job, but it sure is a fun one. So
sure. Yeah. For longtime fans and maybe people just discovering you because of this, how would you describe who Dry Kill Logic is today?
It's a great question. I'd say Dry Kill Logic's an old dog these days, but it's hard to say. I mean, we obviously started in a time when nu metal was the vernacular, and there's arguments about whether we are, whether we aren't. I don't have a problem with it. I'll be honest. I probably found my way in music right around 93, 94. So, those really formative Pantera albums into what hip hop was in the 90s, and then moving into Korn and Machine Head and Fear Factory, and kind of just being introduced to this new generation of aggressive artists that didn't feel like, for lack of a better definition, like somebody else's genre of music. When I was coming up and thrash metal was really awesome, I loved it, but it didn't feel like mine. Industrial was awesome, but it didn't feel like mine. Nu metal, for better or worse, for the time in my life that I was starting to understand and appreciate music, kind of felt like mine. It felt like something I was a part of in a way that was unique to me. So I understand the association, and we're proud to be a part of that genre. I think as members change and as people grow and evolve, evolution is unavoidable, right? The only thing permanent in this life is that you will change. But we've always tried to stand in service of the song. So whatever we've become now, which you could call us a metalcore band, you could call us a groove metal band, you could call us a nu metal band. I think ultimately what we are is just comfortable with who we are. And that's about all I got.
I know there are a couple of other festival performances lined up, and that's awesome. But as mentioned there, the celebration of the Dead and Dreaming is what I'm getting at. And you've got those couple June headline shows where this is noted, as well as playing things that have never been played before, plus the new stuff. I'm getting fucking worked up just thinking about it. I'm sure the excitement is palpable on your end, where you're not going to have to sort out a 7-song set. You're going to have at it.
Yeah, well, it is funny, right? You're starting to do a multiplier, because obviously those headline shows have to be longer, and you want them to be meaningful, and you want them to sort of run the gamut, span the career of the group from then to now, but how do you do that in a way that is realistic to time and not overindulgent, playing things that only a very small part of that audience may want to hear. But choosing that set list is a lot of fun. I think we probably had 7 months to rehearse 7 songs for 30 minutes. And now we have about 3.5 weeks to figure out the remaining songs for the other sets. So that's also been an interesting exercise as well.
Sure.
But yeah, there's some songs that we've played once. There's some songs we've never played. There's a bunch of stuff that we've never, it's meant to be something, I think, that's more about where we left off, and in appreciation for those small rooms that we used to play in with intimate audiences that, really appreciated the band. Whereas the festivals are meant to be something a little bit different. And I think that as long as we recognize them as such, then they'll be successful. So yeah, we're going to have a representation, I think, of all of the eras of Dry Kill Logic in those headline shows.
I love it. Any chance these shows are getting recorded for maybe release later? So folks like me stuck in Ohio and not anywhere near where these are happening get to enjoy?
You know, we're capturing all the footage. You know, the question becomes, how do we want to release it? You know, the construct of a traditional music video seems somewhat outdated these days, but I do think that as we start to tell the story of where the band's been for 20 years, having everything documented cohesively, you know, is part of that exercise. So yeah, we've got a great content team that's helping us kind of document all this stuff, and then at some point we'll figure out how to release it. But you know, I'm not. We've talked about, you know, doing a live from type of performance as well, and getting a professional audio capture and, you know, a multi-camera setup, and like really going after it professionally. But I think that's one of those future initiatives. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew, at least in this first year that we're kind of coming back. So,
okay, well, let's jump with that. You mentioned that, and you lead me right into it. The big question here, you mentioned this first year that we're coming back.
right.
The big question, or really two questions that everyone like myself, that everybody wants to know is this a full comeback that maybe leads to a larger tour, more new music, actual albums, all the fun things of and trappings of a working band?
You know, it's a great question, and what I would say is that what we've learned is that it's a fool's errand to not listen to the universe, right? And I think for a long time we just weren't really, you know, we're not like a heavily, you know, active band on social media. You know, our audience generally consumes content either on Spotify or streaming channels, Apple, Amazon, etc., or YouTube, you know, but we're not necessarily a band that's out there over communicating to an audience, right? And to see the kind of responses that we've received as we've returned to playing live, as we've started to, you know, continue to release music, it's been really inspiring. And I think the universe is kind of telling us that, you know, the people that appreciate Dry Kill Logic and the art that we create would appreciate more of that art. So, you know, now we have these shows coming up, and as we kind of wind down the year performance wise, we plan to get back into the studio and start to record more music, get another body of work together, release it as an album, release it as a collection, you know, I don't know, but the goal is to get the body of work together so that we have, you know, a collection of songs that are ready to go in whatever format audiences would like to receive them. I'm less bullish on the tradition of an album versus, you know, a more forward-thinking way to release things. But then to answer the second part of your question, you know, perhaps the hope is that the universe will continue speaking to us, and those types of opportunities that make sense for a band in our position will present themselves to us. I don't have any delusions about the idea that that doesn't come without hard work. And a band that steps back into the scene after 20 years deserves nothing more than a band that is stepping in for the first time. We're all on equal footing. But my hope is that if we play good shows, audiences will remain engaged, which means that if we write good music, they'll continue to consume it, which means there'll be a further desire to see the band play that music live, and then all things will continue to grow. So the responsibility is on us, I think, right now to just deliver these live shows and deliver a great body of work, and then just continue to, you know, stand in service of the audiences and the music.
Was there can you recall a particular conversation or moment that you feel like kickstarted all this? I know you mentioned you guys were starting to get back together in 2016. So is it something as far back as then?
You know, when we started writing this music, I can't say that it was, you know, an active intention to be, you know, moving forward again as a band. Like I said, we all just enjoyed each other's company, and it was inevitable that we, you know, found ourselves back in the studio writing together again at some point. I guess this whole thing really became, you know, real when we received the offer to play at Welcome to Rockville, because it not only is it the biggest show we've ever played, but it's the largest audience we've ever been in front of. The scale and the cachet of that type of performance is really powerful for a band, especially a band like us that has an audience that just needs a reason to believe. And then watching all of the subsequent engagement occur as a result of that. The excitement of people wanting new music, the excitement of people wanting to see us play live, I think just continues to perpetuate the idea that there's more out there. But I can't say, yeah, we're getting back in the van and we're going to play 300 shows again like we did. Without the proverbial act of God, I would say those types of, behaviors of a 20-something are, the actions of, how did Billy Joel say it, when I wore a younger man's clothes.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that there isn't more to come. It's just, what does that look like reasonably and realistically? And I think that's the question that we're all asking now.
I'll lean into the younger man's clothes here versus the clothes you're wearing now. I saw you guys in the early thousands. You were across a stage not much bigger than this damn room, like a fucking animal that was on fire, and somehow your voice was pitch perfect the whole damn time. How much work did you have to put into it to get back to that for these shows, for this Rockville show, for these coming shows there in June?
That's a great question, and what I've noticed throughout this whole exercise is when this began, right, I hadn't sung in 20 years. And, you start to sing and you realize that it's been 20 years since you've been doing these types of things. And it requires an amount of rigor, an amount of discipline. And I do, vocal training 3 times a week, at a full stage rehearsal level. So I'm actively engaging in the idea of returning to the energy level of the stage. But for a while, I would say things like, oh, my voice isn't where it is, where I want it right now. When I break it in, and when it breaks in, I got to break it in. And after 2 or 3 months, I started to ask myself, what does that mean, break it in? Because if what you're really saying is, I need to get it to the way it used to sound, you're never going to get that voice back again. You were 20 years younger. You were driving around in a van on 90 minutes sleep for years at a time, smoking dozens of blunts a day. You can't possibly get back to that person physically, emotionally, mentally. There is no breaking it in. You're only going to break it. So I started to kind of think about what performance meant in this moment and how my current voice can do a better job of bringing these songs to life. I took vocal lessons with Melissa Cross, and I, learned a bit about how to sing and, how to think about performance. But at the same time that maybe I don't have some of the grit and gravel on the screams, I have a much stronger singing voice now because my voice isn't taxed. So when you listen to songs like Now You Belong with the Dead and there's 6-part melodies, none of that is tuned. That's my voice. And that would have never happened on any of the records 20 years ago because the most I could hit was a half step up, half step down because my voice was broken. So it's really interesting to think about what we consider success vocally because it is much different. So it's a great question, something I've been pondering over the last 7 months myself.
The funny thing to me here is since you and I have been on a call together, one of the first things that I thought and a recurring thought is this dude sounds so fucking normal. I listen to this ferocity come through my speakers, and it's a dude. He sounds normal.
Well, listen, we all have emotions, experiences that cause emotions and leave, scars. I just happen to be able to funnel them into, screaming into a microphone. And by the end of it, you can't really be angry anymore because you're just tired. So,
yeah,
it's an effective way to release it.
Yes, it is for sure. If someone would have told you back when you guys were recording The Dead and Dreaming or when it was being released that these upcoming shows would be happening and how and why they would be happening, what would your response have been?
I'm sure I would not have believed it. There's so much of that record was really about suspension of disbelief. I mean, we were operating as an indie band. We had a very small team helping us across all of the different things we needed to do. We had our tour support, like the only thing that we spent all our money on a van, and we had an old shitty trailer that we bought with our first advance that was just falling apart. But we got the label to give us a credit card, and the only thing we could put on the credit card was gas for the van and 2 hotel rooms a night. And we had to double up and triple up at some point if we had a crew guy, although we never had more than 1 or 2. That was it. Everything else we had to pay out of whatever money we made on the road, and we were never making more than $500 a gig. We never sold more than $100 in merch. So like all of that was really hard. And it was a continuous Sisyphean task of like push the boulder all the way up the hill, just have it roll back over you as it goes. And we never really understood why we did these things. We just knew that this was kind of what we needed to be doing, and this was our life. No plan B. Like Henry Rollins wrote, get in the van. Like we didn't question these things because it's how we defined ourselves. So now as I look back at that person 20 years ago, and I realize that the work that was done then leads to these moments now, I guess I just have an overwhelming sense of gratitude for that band and those moments that did that work when everything felt just completely useless and like nothing was moving forward. The release of the music and the subsequent life that has been lived between then and now by this audience that's connected with the music isn't something, we ever would have imagined. I mean, for context, we started at MySpace and we started at cassette tapes and ended at MySpace. YouTube didn't exist, social didn't exist, streaming didn't exist. So the idea that we have an audience based on platforms we couldn't imagine, I don't know what to make of that. But again, gratitude is the overwhelming emotion, I think.
I'm glad you bring that up. I've got a point about some of those things that I want to get to here in a minute. But while we're living in the past for a second, any fun stories, tour stories, ridiculousness from any of the touring band eras that you want to relay or enjoy retelling?
I mean, it's impossible. Like, there's so many. Like, I think as I look back, I mean, I guess if I look back, I would have to say that the most fun we ever had was on our first tours, and there were 2 of them I think that were really special for us. The first one was the Fear Factory tour when we were just signed to Roadrunner. I mean, we were children, 25 years old, 26 years old, 24 years old, out on the road, direct support for Fear Factory in 2001. I mean, like just playing these shows that we'd only imagined in our minds and being a part of an environment and a system that we had only really ever dreamed about. And, there's a childlike wonder and an innocence and hijinks and hilarity that comes along with that, and embarrassing moments and stupid behaviors, but they're all born from this, childlike wonder of being in these situations for the first time. And the second one was going overseas with Spineshank and touring with them. And again, being in a situation where you're in a much different environment that is, contextually completely irrelevant. You have no idea how anything works. You've never been there before. Those initial moments allow you to be a person that you just can never be again, no matter what success or you have or do not have after that. So I always look at those moments as like, yeah, dude, there's a million things in there. We were just dopey kids having a blast. So I'm sure there's more embarrassing moments in there than I care to recall. But I think it's those firsts that really made the biggest mark for me anyway.
So when those 3 Dry Kill albums originally came out, as you've mentioned, 2001's Dark Side of Nonsense, 2004 Dead and Dreaming, 2006 A Vengeance and Violence, music was mainly consumed by CD. And, I think by the time 2006 gets around, you're probably working your way into the Pirate Bay and torrent stuff as well, and whatever social media stuff is starting to burgeon. I know I still have all 3 of those fucking CDs as well. How different are things for you guys now, where things have moved in some weird combination of forward and backward, with it being for sure a digital first world with social media stuff and videos and everything, but also a fucking vinyl resurgence.
Right. It is wild, to your point. If there's one overarching kind of seismic shift that I feel just, in this very particular, environment that we're in coming back after 20 years, I think it's the democratization of the industry. in 2004, if we wanted you to hear the band at scale, we would have had to have been on the radio. If we wanted you to see visual content, we would have had to have been on MTV. If we wanted folks to know more about us, we would have had to go through a publicist to get to editorial outlets. And all of those have gatekeepers, and all of those have biases and systems that don't allow for artists that may deserve a shot to necessarily get that shot. And I think that that's where you start to find your nepotism, elitism, cronyism, right? Back in those days, it was very hard to make an impact, and we would just play any show we could and just always be on the road because that's the best of our abilities, what we could control, right? We can come out, we can play a show, you can come to it, we can meet you after, we can see you. And that's where we kind of focused our efforts at a moment when, bands weren't really taking touring that seriously. I mean, obviously touring was a part of it, but touring supported a record. Now records support the tour. I think it's twofold. I see the ability to directly connect with an audience, whether it's through long form conversation like this or short form conversation like social, or getting direct feedback through comments on Spotify, or seeing what people think of your, approach to visuals on YouTube. You can have an instantaneous reaction and a follow-up conversation to learn more if you choose to. And you can do this at scale anytime you want. You can reach out to any editorial page, and if they like you, you can set up and have a relationship with them directly. It doesn't involve a publicity team. That democratization is so compelling. And at the same time, I realize how much work it is. So I have it's not like you could just say, oh, it's so easy for you now. When I was a kid, no, you're working 15 times as hard, from the beginning of your band versus having to be like me and go 31 years into a system to realize that this is the best it's ever been. You have it the best it's ever been, and you can capitalize on that in ways we never could, just because of how the time was. So I think that for me is the most exciting part and the biggest difference.
Even with all of those gatekeepers, is there a particular song or single that you're surprised didn't catch on?
I don't know if I'm one that didn't catch on, but I will. I mean, I'll tell you just a funny anecdotal story. We when we came out on Roadrunner, the first single that we determined was Nightmare. Felt like it had the most appeal. And I remember at the time standing in Monty Connor's office and Monty saying, all right, we got Nightmare. We feel great about it. Here's what you're up against this week. And he played Mudvayne's Dig and he played Drowning Pool Bodies. And he was like, all right, this is it. This is what we're up against. And you could tell who won and who didn't. But my point is that, as we're thinking about those times and, those kind of moments, it's just important, I think, to contextualize the idea that we didn't really know what to expect as we were in those moments and in those things. But when we went with Nightmare, it did okay. We needed to figure out what the follow-up would be. And we said, I don't know. Let's release Rot. We'll go with Rot as the second single. And, Rot was like not a song, we were, oh, do we do Feel the Break, or do we do, I don't know, something else, or Pain, or something with a singing chorus? Like Rot feels a little weird for a song. And I'll never forget, we did the Prong cover, and they said, well, if you don't like Rot, you can just play the cover, right? They're already setting it up for like, if you don't like this, you just play that. And they made the samplers and they sent it out, and they sent me a sampler, and they say, hey man, here's a sampler. And it looked beautiful. And I remember very clearly putting it in my CD player, and I heard a curse. And I was like, wait, why did I hear a curse? This is the radio single. And then I heard another curse, and I was like, what the fuck? So I called the label and I was like, dude, there's curses on the radio edit. Like, did the stations edit this? And they put the wrong version of the song on the radio single, so it couldn't be played. So everyone got the radio single, nobody could play it. So that was the end. We never went with the third single. Now, 20 years later, that song's got 16 million spins on Spotify. It eclipses any other track we have. And I'm just kind of cosmically fascinated by the idea that the big song that we all thought was going to be the hit wasn't when positioned against real hits. And the little engine that never really got a break over time did the job that it needed to do. So and life is wild. So I don't know if there's one that, deserved it or didn't, but that's just a funny story.
That is fucking great. Before we get too far away from it, I think I probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyways. Will there be any vinyl re-releases or anything like that?
I just have to figure out how all this shit works. I would love to do it. It's like, again, one of these things, like, you can release vinyl, and by you, I mean you specifically can go figure out how to do it, So it's like, I think at some point, again, as we start to think about these things, we really would like to have those offerings. I also, if I'm being completely transparent, am a little bit sensitive to over commercializing the band. This isn't really about a money grab for us. Like, we don't need the money of making the vinyl. It's not a P&L scenario. I think if audiences want this type of stuff from the group, we're happy to make it because we want to make rad stuff that people want. But I'm cautious that, I want to lead with the heart, not with the hand, and, make merch and make cool things that people want to buy. But if you showed up and we had like 65 pieces of merch, every record on vinyl, every patch, and we'd be like, are you just trying to get the dollar out of me?
Sure.
That's why it's like, we want to make cool stuff in limited quantities that you want. And then, grow. And yes, vinyl is a plan. We'd love to. Maybe one day we could figure out a way for Roadrunner to do the Darker Side of Nonsense. Maybe they could issue that release. Maybe we'll figure out a way to do the Dead and Dreaming, with the folks. We'll have to see. But it would be awesome. I would love it. I got a lot of ideas for it, but nothing as of yet.
I know I would love it. I still remember when I found out, because it's 2006. It's not what you're used to now. Through some random fashion, I found out that Vengeance and Violence was out. I said, well, fuck me, cancel the rest of the day. I'm putting on my shoes. I'm going to media play. I gotta go get this album. And that's one of the few decisions in my life that I have zero regrets about.
Well, I appreciate that.
So speaking of the 3 albums there, is there a song or an album that you felt one way about in its moment back in the early thousands that you feel different about now?
A song or one of the records?
Either one. Whichever gets me the better answer.
I don't know. I guess, when you look at A Vengeance and Violence, we released that record pretty quickly. We toured on it 3 different times overseas, twice in Europe, once in Australia. And then the band went on hiatus a few months after its release. And, that's an album, I think, that has songs that we're really proud of. My Dying Hard, Confidence vs. Consequence, 4039, Dead Man's Eyes, Boneyard. There's a lot of songs on there that we, really feel like we pushed limits on, whether it was me vocally or lyrically, or Jay and Brendan musically. And we're really proud of that album. It's just not one that, we ever got to stand behind the same way we did with the Darker Side of Nonsense or the Dead and Dreaming. So I think now, as we start to think about headline shows and, some of these, other shows that we're playing, it's a good opportunity to pay tribute to those songs and maybe play them for the first time. I mean, every song that we play from that album will be the first time anyone in the U.S. has heard it. We only played a few of them overseas when we went. So again, all of those types of songs, as we celebrate that album now in these headlines, is also something really interesting. And next year is the 20th anniversary of that album. So, yeah.
I'm not paying lip service when I say it's my favorite. From Victim to Killer gets me fired up every fucking time I hear it.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's an underappreciated track. That was a fun one to write too.
Oh man. And speaking of fun, we'll jump to this. It seems like for as aggressive and pissed off and all those things a lot of these songs are, and just heavy in all of the known ways, there's a little light of silliness in each album somewhere. There's some bit of goofiness there with Boneyard there in the beginning where you're trying to get the go set up. It's fucking hilarious. 1, talk me through that moment. What makes you decide to do it? Is it as fun and funny as it sounds in the moment? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's hard to hide the personality of this band, and it's fun to let it shine in those moments. I remember when we were, when I was, coming up in the scene, a band that I thought first band I ever heard did stuff like that was Coal Chamber on their first album, and they had a lot of that kind of band interplay woven into the songs, beginnings and ends. And I just thought that it was a really natural vibe. When you started to listen to them, it was beyond the music. You got a sense of personality beyond the song. And while it wasn't a direct one-to-one to do that, I think that in those moments, what that record showed us was it's okay to allow your personality to shine through in ways that could be considered non-traditional. And full story behind that intro to Boneyard, The Innocence of Genius, that is actually not me. That is Brendan, our bass player, who always thought that was a funny way to set that song up, because it would, we would be rehearsing it and he would be like, oh, and then he would stop, and he was just being funny when he would do it. So we just always laughed. And then in the studio, he was like, I got something. And we just did it, and we were just cracking up. So all that sort of stuff. And you hear that interplay even on the first record with Phil at the end of, Nightmare, and some of the other songs, Sab, that was a song about a guy that used to fall asleep drunk at our studio, and we would scream that song at him and play it at full volume when it was time to go home to wake him up, and he would not wake up. And we just, so he just, like it's just the personality. And I think that's, we don't take ourselves too seriously, even though we're pretty serious and intent. We have intent with our music. We're not like serious in the moments where it's not called for.
For my money, you guys are the kings of the In Like a Lion, Out Like a Lamb album. All three of these start off with something heavy as all fuck, and there's plenty of meat, more fucking heavy shit in the album after that. But then you go out nice, quiet, and fucking, for lack of a longer way of saying it, sad. It'd make you fucking cry. Where did that idea come from? Was there pushback about it? And how hard were those songs for you?
Again, we stand in service of the song. And I think what that shows, and to your credit for calling it out, is that we're not necessarily trying to just do one thing or be one thing. We believe that, collectively we write songs that make us feel a certain way, no matter what types of songs they are. And we want our audience that appreciates the art that we create to experience them as well. I think Goodnight started as a riff that Phil, my guitar player, had, and I had the lyrics for that song for a long time, and I just never knew where to put them. And we've always been inspired by acoustic artists, whether it's Tom Waits or Steve Earle or the Alice in Chains, Jar of Flies, right? Like all of that stuff is also a big part of who we are musically. And even though it's not aggressive, there's still emotion attached to it. So we always loved playing acoustic guitar. We love those kind of softer songs, and singing for me isn't really an issue. I enjoy it. I don't do it as much as people tell me I should, but I just feel comfortable shouting. So, but when there is a reason to sing, we'll find the space for it in the song. And I think, the range and the dynamics of songs we try to put on records, just tries to take into account that approach.
Lyrically, the aggressive songs, there's, I don't feel like I'm telling any secrets when it seems like there are themes of anger, frustration, conflict, all these things. I think there are also some songs that are sneaky positive in things like 200 Years and Confidence versus Consequence. First of all, what are you so pissed off about? Second of all, did you feel like you had to try to sneak some positive type themes in there?
Well, to answer the first question, what am I pissed off about? Everything. Who am I pissed off at? Everyone. There's a lot to be upset about in today's world. No matter what you believe everybody's doing it wrong. So, as we think about the things that we experience, they may be very individual, but the way they make us feel, well, that's incredibly collective. So I think a lot of the lyrics that I write and the way that I approach lyrics is, yeah, there's things that piss me off and things that make me, find that emotion in myself and want to, express myself in that way. And what I guess I found along the way is that I'm not necessarily alone. And generally, most people, once they are, they get the rage out of them, they try to find a way forward. And I think that that's the sentiment behind, what we would consider the more positive side of the lyrics that I write, is really more about, the idea that we all push forward in this world, and it's the action of moving forward that defines us, not where we land when we do. So it's meant to be empowering in the sense that once you're done being pissed off, use it to your advantage and moves forward in a positive way that benefits you.
What is I don't know. There's 3 different ways to ask this, and I haven't decided on one, so I'm going to wordify it on the fly. What
right.
will be the writing process? Is it an in the room collaborative thing? Do you have lyrics and melodies stored away? How do these things work? You've mentioned a couple times that you guys are longstanding friends, so it sounds like there's a good relationship there. How does it work?
Yeah, there's generally a level of trust when it comes to like songwriting and criticism and critiquing of, individual parts. Again, our only goal is to write great music together. And there's really no wrong answer. Even if something doesn't work, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it doesn't work right now. So, there's really no wrong answer when it comes to creating anything. But generally the process is something along the lines of, Jay and Brendan, or Brendan, or the instrument bearing members of the band will come up with riffs and form ideas and start to think about cadences and, structures. And then from there, they'll share them with me. And then I start to think about phrasing and syllable placement and word placement and melodies. And, and then from there, as that comes together, the song continues to take shape. As the song starts to take shape, the lyrics are further refined, right? It's a sifting process, much like mining for gold. It's not just one thing and it kind of just comes out. It's a continuous process, and we all pay into that process. I receive feedback from the guys on lyrics and phrasing and placements. I give feedback on song structure and note choices because of where the lyrics or where the melodies I hear go. And then we have thoughtful conversations about what's the best output. And, it's a democracy. So I don't like to be the 1 out of 10 dentists that tells you that brushing your teeth is bad, right? But, we try to come to a consensus where we're all, happy with the output, even if our ideas weren't the ones that lifted to the top in this moment. So, again, we're friends. It's a song. Like, what are we doing? Like, you can't get mad about stuff. That's silly.
Right. When and how did you realize that you had the chops with the vocal stuff?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, in the early formative years of the band, we were a cover band. A lot of the music we played as we were starting was just covers because we were learning how to write. And, like Seven Mary 3 and Cinderella, all those like 90s alt rock hits when we were just first starting, and Rage Against the Machine, Tool, that type of stuff. And, I mean, it was fun, but like I wasn't, I'm not an alt rock singer. I'm not a grunge singer. So there's a ceiling to how effective I'm going to be in that type of, music. I'm not that singer. And somewhere along the line, we wrote a song that had heavier parts than we've ever written. And we were like, oh, I don't know, how do we feel about this? And I was like, play that part again. And I started screaming over the top, and I scared everybody in the room. And they were like, well, that was awesome, though, but you don't do that. And I was like, yeah, but I think I want to. It was fun. Like, I enjoyed that. And it was just this totally, like, left this center, like, hey, I got, I don't look like I'm about to scream. And I'm like, let me try something, play the riff again. And they were like, okay. And all of a sudden, I'm like, ah! I just started screaming incoherent. And they were like, that's awesome. And then, again, we were children, so I'm sure it wasn't very good. But if memory serves, I think that became that song in that moment became the song King Man that we released on Because Moshing is Good Fun, the EP that we did in the 90s. So everything starts somewhere, I suppose.
And speaking of cover songs, is the way I'm going to try to bridge this. In the past 25 years, have you heard stuff and thought, we fucking influenced them?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I can't say I've heard anyone and been like, dude, that's like us. No, I don't think so. I think what I find most interesting, though, and again, this is more of a reflection over time than something that I've consciously noticed at any one point. But I just love, at one point there was resistance to the musicality of new metal and the simplicity of the riff structure and the down tuning and 7-string guitars. Those fell out of fashion pretty quickly in the mid 2000s, and some of those hallmarks of the genre weren't as well received. But over time, you have seen those elements kind of creep back into music. And now, down tuning and simpler riffs and breakdowns and bass drops and 808s are a big part of modern day metal's aesthetic. So I think for me, that's something I've seen. Not you're copying Dry Kill, but just it's awesome to see the parts that I loved about the genre 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, pull their way forward and continue in the new genre of music. I think I appreciate that. I really enjoy it when I hear it, to be honest.
What's a common myth that you would debunk or encourage in relation to heavy music?
If there's anything partisan about metal music, and I don't mean in a political sense. I mean, it's easy to stereotype those that listen to things that you don't listen to or dress in a way you don't dress. But scratch just a bit below the surface and you'll find incredibly dynamic personalities, incredibly emotional audiences, and people that are inherently willing to listen and learn to people from people in the pit and people that love music and people that are considered thought leaders in the space. There's a lot of sharing. There's not a lot of pretense or posturing. So I just think that ultimately it's a lot more inviting perhaps than some others.
What's one thing you wish you would have known when you started?
I guess I'll give what I think is a Mike Tyson quote, only because I heard him say it, and I'm not sure if he's quoting somebody else. Let me think about it for a minute so I make sure I get it right.
This everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth?
No, that's honestly one of my favorites. No, this one's a little bit more general, which is why I'm not entirely sure it's him. Not everyone that helps you is a friend, and not everyone that hurts you is an enemy. So I think that if somebody could have explained that to my younger self, I might have been able to see the forest for the trees in certain instances when I could not.
This has been a lot of fun, man. We're going to start to turn this into the way that I end these things. I've got one more question before we get into that, and that's just a kind of general. I mean, it's been a long time. There's no way you've just been sitting on your hands. Is there anything else that you're involved with that you want people to know about?
No, I mean, we're all just trying to have a life well lived at this point. We all have different interests and different pursuits, but I think for the purpose of our conversation and the audiences that care, I think we're just incredibly grateful to be in a position to have this conversation. We're thankful that folks still consume the music, and we're, excited to get back out and see folks again for the first time, whether it's Ohio or Wisconsin or California or New York and New Jersey. So I hope I'm going to see you at Incarceration.
We'll have a conversation about that here in a minute. We'll round this into the dumbass way that I end these things. We'll do a set of stupid fire questions here. Start with an easy one. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Something you could eat for a week straight?
Steak.
Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
If you had to compare Dry Kill Logic to an animal, what would the animal be?
A hyena.
Okay. I could see that. As I typically find myself saying in this section, this is apparently the animal section of the show. If you could ask one animal one question, what's the animal? What's the question?
My dog. And why does it pick the toys that it does when it brings them to me?
That's very specific. I love it. What's one heavy song that everyone should hear before they die?
Oh, well, shoot, man. I mean, yeah, if you haven't heard it already, man, you better get yourself on a Pantera train and check out 5 Minutes Alone.
Beer or liquor?
Oh, liquor.
What, not format specific here. What's the first album you ever bought?
First album I ever purchased. I believe, if memory serves, it was a cassette tape of Metallica's Kill Them All. And I did it primarily because I was in a flea market and I wanted to piss off my mom. So I show up with a tape that says Kill Them All. This is bound to get me in some sort of trouble. And then I knew the record was good because my friends had turned me on to it. And this was the one I bought for me. And I just remember, it was all love after that. So.
Yeah, that's certainly a good starting spot. Go-to karaoke song.
Oh, that's a good question. It's either Wagon Wheel or Believe It or Not. And it depends on the version that you get.
You just said Wagon Wheel, and you're going to follow up with Believe It or Not for something else?
No. If Believe It or Not, the other one I would go for, if they had the right version available, would be a Millie from Lil Wayne.
I would pay good money to see either one of those. Sausage links or patties?
Oh, links. Italian
Links
for
guy.
Christ.
Oh,
Italian.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. The last thing here is completely unique to the show. Nobody's ever thought to ask a question like this before. Patent pending for anybody that's trying to steal it. You, Cliff of Dry Kill Logic, get sent to an island for the rest of your life by yourself. You get to take one album with you. What's the album?
Billy Joel's Greatest Hits. The essential Billy Joel.
The essential Billy Joel. He was quick with that one. At this point, I'd like to thank Cliff for taking the time to talk with me today. If you're making it to any of their upcoming performances, A, I'm jealous. B, please report back afterwards. You'll find links to them in the show description, wherever it is that you're hearing this from. You'll also find links for the Brimming Horn dudes as well as the show. And again, please hit the subscribe button for me to wherever it is you're enjoying this from. Now that I've said all that successfully, I'm going to turn it back over to Cliff to get us out of here right.
Hey, what's up, folks? This is Cliff from Dry Kill Logic, and you are listening to Now You Belong with the Dead. Peace and love, peace and love.
Descend.